Pollk County Jane Doe, identified as Kathy Thomas. 25 years ago, Kathy Thomas disappeared without any fanfare. Her husband moved on, married someone else, and had a son. While he was moving on with his life, she became a Jane Doe. At the time of her death, Kathy was a 43-year-old woman living in Salem, Oregon. She'd had 3 children and lived a hard life. Reports suggest that all 3 of her marriages were abusive. Her 3 children were long gone, as she had lost custody to the state. Those children would eventually come looking for her. It turns out her husband never even bothered to report her missing. There was likely a really good reason for that, however, given he was arrested just a few days ago for her murder. It turns out that the TV channel Oxygen had a huge impact on making justice be served. It was Oxygen that paid to process the DNA. They also paid to process the old evidence, also paying for a private investigator. It was that investigator that discovered that Kathy's 3rd husband, Brian Clifton, was living in Oklahoma. So this isn't like a lot of the other cases where the Jane Doe wasn't known. They figured out her identity several years ago. However, just this last week, it led to Brian Clifton being arrested for murder. As a result, Brian Clifton was transported to Pollk County Circuit Court, where he is charged with first-degree murder. Kathy's oldest daughter, Tina Grugg, spoke to the press in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she lives. She reported that she can feel her mother right now with her, and that she was finally getting justice. It took 10 months to build Kathy's family tree in hopes of identifying her. Investigators tracked down Kathy's sister, Linda Amsler, in Oklahoma. It was then that they asked her if she had a sister who had gone missing, which she said she had. The 3 siblings were born to parents who divorced when they were just kids. It turns out 2 of the kids went with the mother during the divorce, and it was Kathy who went with her father to Rosenberg, Texas, where life was not easy at all. Her life with her father meant never having enough food to eat. She would show up at the landlord's house begging for food. Eventually, that landlord offered her father money in order to adopt her. He accepted the $5,000, and Kathy went to live with the landlord. For the first time in her life, Kathy had the security and love that she needed, but this wasn't going to last. Sadly, her adopted mother got cancer, passing away when Kathy was just a teenager. Kathy once again found herself searching for security and love, and she became pregnant at 16. By 17, she was a mother herself. By 22, she had 2 children, and by 24, she would have 3. There are 2 different stories that have been reported about the loss of custody of her kids. In one, she found her biological mother at some point and left all 3 kids with their grandmother to raise. And in turn, Kathy's biological mother was either unable or unwilling to care for them and turned them over to the state. A different version states that Kathy's oldest daughter, Tina, was born after only a year of marriage, and she and Carl would divorce. A few months later, she would marry for the 2nd time, and he would be a father to the 2 following children. That marriage also would not last long, and by 24, she was divorced with 3 children. It was at this time that history began to repeat itself, and she found herself leaving her children alone and unattended. I suspect this is probably the accurate story. Either way, the children were taken by Child Protective Services, and she found herself alone. All 3 kids were eventually adopted into good homes. Kathy would go on to marry 3 times, marrying Clifton in 1984 when she returned to Oregon. Clifton was likely not a good man, and the murder of his wife was not the only one he's been arrested for. He'd been convicted of murdering a female motel clerk in 1973, strangling her in order to steal $65. He was sentenced to life in prison, but it would turn out that only amounted to 6 years in jail. He was out and wandering the streets again by 1981. It was here that he met Kathy. Little is known of her life with Clifton. Court records show she reported an unrelated hit and run to the Salem PD in March of 1996. That is the last official record of her being alive. Not quite 6 months later, her body was found in an area overlooking Mill Creek, about 20 miles west of Salem. She was wrapped in a tarp and secured with rope. A sack of men's clothing was found nearby. Clifton was arrested in Shawnee, Oklahoma, after confessing to involvement in her murder. Her oldest daughter grew up aching for the love of her mother. She has random memories of being held and driving around with her mom. She remembers her as being spirited. She said that for a long time she held a lot of anger for her mother leaving her, but she is at peace now. In fact, she grew up to be a child welfare worker and helps kids like she once was. Kathy's 3 kids would eventually reunite in adulthood. 2 of the kids remained in Oklahoma and another was in Texas. It is their request that their mother be known by her birth name, rather than the married name of Clifton. Clifton did one lone good thing for those kids. He explained that their mother always carried a picture of all 3 kids with her, all of the time. Kathy lost her kids, but she never forgot them, and she loved them the entire time. During the investigation, it turned out that the clothing found by Kathy's body was the key. They were pretty sure once they knew Kathy's identity that they would find he disposed of the incriminating clothes right along with her. In order to prove their suspicions, they needed to test the DNA of the clothing and also compare it to that of Clifton. The investigators, in turn, approached Clifton's sister Brenda. Brenda describes her brother to the authorities as the scum of the earth, and she expressed a belief that he probably was her murderer. She offered her DNA, and it would turn out it was a 99% sibling match to the owner of the clothes found at the scene. It was this that tied Clifton to the murder. Brian Clifton was just arrested for her murder and currently sits in jail. Far too often, the murderer doesn't ever pay with the Doe cases. They strip their victim of her life as well as her identity. Hopefully this time he will stay in jail where he can't hurt anyone else. Kathy Thomas went unidentified for 25 years. If she was still alive today, she would be 68. The Phoenix, Arizona Jane Doe, 2017. Identified as Laura Jean Jordan. A woman was found passed away behind a house. This was due to heat exhaustion in Phoenix, Arizona in 2017. But without any ID or any clues to who she would be labeled a Jane Doe and buried. It would take 4 years. However, the Phoenix Police Department just identified her as Laura Jean Jordan. The Phoenix Police Department announced how thankful they are to the DNA Doe Project. It turned out that the DNA Doe Project was able to solve the case in only 2 months, which is very short for this type of identification. Volunteers for the DNA Doe Project go in and they build family trees using the public database GEDmatch. They eventually contact individuals within the tree, at which time they build a branch of the tree by requesting DNA from other people within the family. And in this case, it's likely the only way this case would have been solved. It turns out that Laura wasn't reported missing because her family had no idea where she was. They witnessed her physically leaving on a bus from California to Oklahoma, where she lived. They have no idea why she would have been in Phoenix and would never have thought to look for her there. Laura lived a nomadic life of sorts, and they had been looking for her over the last few years, but they never dreamed she had passed away and was not out there somewhere. They went on to say it's emotionally devastating, but there is also some relief to know what happened to her. Laura Jean Jordan went unidentified for 4 years. The Lake Michigan Jane Doe, just identified as Yarianna Wheeler. I usually only focus on cold cases. However, this woman deserves justice and attention too. On August 15th of this year, a deceased woman was found by a fisherman floating in Lake Michigan. It earned her the moniker of Lake Michigan Jane Doe. Fortunately, the sketch they released was helpful in identifying her, and they were able to use dental records to confirm her identity. Turns out, Yariana was only 19, and she was 6 or 7 months pregnant when her life was taken, about 7 to 12 days prior to being found. Yariana had been living in Chicago, but was originally from the general area, on the 32nd block of West Wilcox Street in Bellwood. The sheriff's office is investigating her death as a homicide. The autopsy revealed she had several sharp force injuries on her body. The official cause of death is still pending. Anyone with any information at all about Yarianna Wheeler or the incident leading to her disappearance and death is being asked to contact the Lake County Sheriff's Detectives at 231-745-2712. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button. A like and a comment below is also really welcomed, as it will help with the YouTube algorithm. I just got the news we're showing up as a suggestion from other sites, which is great news, and we hope to keep it that way. We have new videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.